One of the world's rising cities is Rio de Janeiro. In 2016, Rio will host the Summer Olympics. And in preparation for that global event, Rio has been investing very heavily in infrastructure, innovative technology, and digital systems. This investment is not just to meet the crush of the upcoming Olympics, but also to deal with that city's extraordinary growth. Guru Banavar has been at the center of this city-building exercise in South America. He's IBM's Chief Technology Officer for the global public sector, and he's overseeing Rio's operations center, a sort of urban mission control that can manage everything from traffic to seeing whether today's rainstorm is going to cause a mudslide in certain neighborhoods, and can therefore alert the right systems to save lives. Please join me in welcoming Guru Banavar to the stage.
Good morning. I'm really honored to be here addressing such an eminent audience. This is a great city, city of Toronto, and while my role is global, I do try to get into the local culture every city that I go into, and after this morning's double-double, I feel quite Canadian. So I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about some of the work that I do as IBM's Global Chief Technology Officer for Smarter Cities, as we call it. And I will use the example of Rio de Janeiro as the driver for some of the progress that we've actually made in the last couple of years by building a digital infrastructure. Thank you, David, for mentioning that, and Ilse also. A digital infrastructure that can actually propel a city into the 21st century. In many cases, leapfrogging many other cities. But I want to start from the point about innovation, and just want to mention that IBM's 100 years, which we just celebrated last year, by the way, has been throughout a journey of innovation. It started off very early on with innovation in culture, innovation in organizational and management methods. And when we define ourselves as a business machines or a computing company, all the foundational innovations of computing, which, by the way, I'm a computing scientist myself. I worked in IBM research for many years. Many of the foundations came from IBM's research labs, like, for example, Fortran, the language, or relational databases. These are all things that every computer scientist studies today. More recently, you've also seen about supercomputing and what that's capable of doing. About 15 years ago, we built a supercomputer that can beat the world's chess champion. And just last year, we built a supercomputer that can beat the world's Jeopardy champions. And that is a really, really significant feat. Because we've always been thinking about something called the Turing test, which is how close are computers to humans, really. And we've been taking steps in that direction of intelligence, of cognition, if you will. And this latest innovation with the Watson supercomputer, as we call it, which beat Ken Jennings just last year, very visible television show, was yet another step in that direction. And it's not just about proving that you can do these visible kinds of things. It's really about transforming people's lives through innovation. And it's about how you can use the vast amount of knowledge available in the World Wide Web to improve, let's say, healthcare, or to improve the way in which we manage our finance industry, and so forth. So we have a whole bunch of innovations that has defined the role of IBM in society. And part of that is about transforming ourselves every few years. the one constant thing is about the strategy and the values of a company that can thrive for 100 years. Goes through ebbs and flows, but foundationally stays constant. And a significant investment in research and development. IBM spends more than $6 billion every year in research and development. But more recently, we have started to look at what it takes to make the world more sustainable. And sustainable not only in the environmental sense, but sustainable more broadly, as in economic sustainability, social sustainability. And what does it take to be smarter about managing the resources that we already have? And this is what this whole conference is all about. How do we apply innovation to make our cities more sustainable? I'm just coming back from the World Cities Forum in Singapore, where we had more than 100 mayors from around the world meet every year. Actually, every 2 years there's an award, but every year they do meet to talk about the world's sustainability challenges in this broad definition of sustainability. And it's absolutely clear that we are on an inflection point where we need to think differently about how we develop our urban areas. So I'm going to bring some of that experience and talk to you about what is going on the global stage. I don't think I need to say much about the need for making things smarter. It's pretty clear. We look all around us. We see crumbling infrastructure. We see deteriorating services. And it's not just in one part of the world. In fact, IBM did something called an innovation jam, which is something we do. It's a large-scale brainstorming session. We did that about 2007. And we asked the employees of IBM, their clients, their families, what are the big issues in your part of the world? IBM does business in 170 countries. And we had about 150,000 people join this innovation jam and talk about issues in their 62 countries that they came from. And all of them were talking about very similar things. In this new world, it's about better infrastructure, better services to support urban life and urban innovation. That was a very strong common theme in that innovation jam that we did. And that was, in fact, the start of our journey towards creating what we call a strategy for smarter planet. So what is different about cities now, besides the fact that it's such a major focus for development in the 21st century? 20th century was a century of nations, but 21st century is a century of cities. But what is different now that you did not have available 10 years ago? And I would say it's one thing. It's information. And information I look at as a new resource. Just like you have natural resources, land, water, air, I think we need to start looking at information as a new resource that can help us take the next step in the development of cities. And why is information a new resource? It's because we collect information from almost everything now. We collect data, actually, I should say. Converting that data into information is not an easy task, and that information into knowledge and input into your decision making is the hardest task, and that's what I'm going to spend most of my talk on. But the data that we collect from all the physical objects around us, look at streets. You have sensors for deciding or determining the volume of traffic. It's embedded in the streets. It's on light poles. It's you can look at the concentration of mobile phones, and you can determine the volume and flow of traffic if you like. You can use new technologies like Bluetooth, even sound, to determine how traffic is flowing. Just to pick that. Or if you look at energy or water, you can look at how large grids that used to be just marvels of civil and mechanical engineering are now marvels of information technology, because you have sensors in very large grids that can tell you what the flow of water is, what the demand for electricity is. You have smart meters at the consumer's level, but you have information about what is being generated, what's being consumed, what's being transferred and distributed. All of that information is available now. So it's almost like the physical infrastructure of a city has suddenly become alive with information. The question is, how do we use that information? And that is where this chart, which looks a little more technical, but I'm the chief technology officer. I got to say something a little more technical. This idea of modeling, creating an understanding of the physical world in the virtual world can help you make a lot of advances. So at the bottom of this picture, you see the idea of capturing information. You see the physical world has a lot of these entities, bridges, roads, and buildings, and pipes, and everything else, but you collect the information. That's at the bottom. But what happens when you switch to the top layer of this picture is the crucial element, which is how you assimilate that data within the context of an information model. That information model gives you the ability to understand the relationships among the physical objects and actually simulate or even run what-if scenarios to see what happens when one element changes, what impact it has, what the causes are for other phenomena in your infrastructure. That ability to model and understand the physical infrastructure did not exist even 10 years ago. We now have models for everything. You can talk about models for traffic, models for weather, models for your electricity grid, models for planning your cities long term. Looking at what we call systems dynamics, meaning what the interrelationships are between your transportation system, your crime management system, your education system, your healthcare system. All of those dependencies can now be understood in a much deeper way because we have the information and we can model them in these complex information models. So the digital infrastructure is not just about laying fiber optic networks where you can collect information. It's really about using that data for making decisions. And for that, you need the models and you need the decision-making ability to make a change in the physical world or to make the right decisions, whether it's a policy decision or an engineering decision. You need to make decisions based on this information. That's really the crucial point about what has changed in the last 10 years. There's this other view that planning of a city is going to solve many of the problems, but it's really not very it's not been borne out by experience. I was speaking to the long-term planner of the city of Singapore just a few months ago, and he said that when he planned the city of Singapore, he thought he planned it for the next 100 years. Right? 80 years later, all of his assumptions were wrong because the city of Singapore completely changed directions. So it's not enough to plan well. It's important to manage and operate the city. In fact, David mentioned all of the elements of planning all the way to management, and I call that operational management. There's this loop between the planning and the operations, which is crucial because the planning gives you the requirements and the constraints for managing your city, but your day-to-day operations will give you the historical trends and information that has to be fed back into the planning for the next round. And this loop has to be tight. You can't do this loop once every 10 years. It may need to happen once every year or 2 years, or maybe even less than that, depending on the rate of growth of your particular environment. This is absolutely crucial, and I don't think this is part of city management today. And it's turning to be that way, and I'll give you a few examples of that. If you look at the city as a system, ultimately, what are we trying to do? We are trying to deliver better services. But the system of a city is very complex, and delivering better services means different things in each of these subsystems. A city can consist of, the transportation system, the public safety system, the energy system, or the healthcare system, and so forth. And each of those services in a city has a different key performance indicator, if you will, for delivering their service. But if you use information, those services can be vastly improved because you understand what the demand for the services are, you understand what the patterns of usage are, and therefore you can actually modify your delivery of services. It's also important to not think about just the more conventional ways of developing cities, which is, if I need to improve my traffic, let me go pour more concrete, or build more roads, which is the traditional, view of, changing the world through physical infrastructure. But now, with a fraction of the same kind of investment in your digital infrastructure, you can in fact expand and enhance the capacity of your existing physical infrastructure. And we've seen that in examples around the world. It's not only about optimizing a single department, it's about managing the communication and coordination across multiple departments in the city that can make the city much smarter. Ultimately, by delivering better services and by improving your infrastructure, what you're competing for and getting for your own city is the crucial resource of creative talent, which is very fluid, like capital is or like information is. And if you can attract the right creative talent into your cities, that's going to be your competitive differentiator. And we've seen that over and over again. Toronto, I think, is a great example of that. So with all of that as background, we now have finished many projects around the world. We are engaged in more than 2,000 projects around the world. You can see the geographic distribution of that. There's a lot of projects which covers the developed world, the emerging world, all the continents, and I personally am engaged in a couple of dozen projects in all of the continents. And I want to bring some of that experience that we've gathered from all of these projects. I want to highlight a few projects, but I want to focus on the Rio de Janeiro example because I think that's a case study of something that has built a comprehensive and almost a leapfrogging view of how cities ought to be managed. Some examples of what we've achieved in these projects around the world. Transportation, right? In Stockholm, we had a congestion management system. They chose to charge for congestion, and that's not the right choice for everybody, right? There are different ways of doing it, and whatever is the right choice for your city can be implemented through digital infrastructure and through the right kinds of services and models that can be done through information technology. But they were able to reduce congestion by 20%, and that had many secondary effects. It reduced pollution by 12%. It even increased retail business because the central business district had a lot more people walking now, and because they were walking, they were stopping by stores. So there was an increase in retail business. There was even some correlations that's now been made to reduce numbers of cases of asthma in the city. If you look at crime management, Richmond is a good example, but I live in New York City, and I've seen this myself over the last several years. The management of public safety in New York City and in many of these other cities has dramatically improved because of information technology. You have unstructured data, which is about, it can be from the web, which is highly unstructured. It can be, structured information that you keep in your correction system or information that you use for investigation. It can be video cameras that you're using. All of that needs to be brought together to provide the next level of intelligence for police to not only respond to crime incidents, but actually predict what's likely to happen in the next 24 hours based on historical information and use that to plan how you deploy resources. Because city departments of every kind is not necessarily going to be flush with cash, right? It's all, going to be trying to do more with less. So when you have a limited set of resources, how do you efficiently manage the use of those limited resources in order to get the maximum outcome? That's the kind of thing you can do with smarter public safety. We have examples in energy. We've done a project in Malta, which has shown that end-to-end management of demand and supply has, in fact, changed the equation. We've done work in social services. We've done work in managing water. Many cities lose 20%. I was in Lima, Peru recently, and they lose 32% of their water, fresh water, and they're in a not a very high production of water environment. So they cannot sustain themselves more than a decade if they keep losing water. But the question is, how can you manage that? You can do that through information technology, because you can see where the leaks are happening, and you can in fact see the leaks or the breakages in pipes before they actually happen, because you can monitor the flow of water and you can tell when a pipe is reaching a point where it's going to break shortly. I want to focus on Rio because we brought together in Rio essentially the entire set of departments in the city. 30 departments came together under one roof. We called it the City Operations Center. All the key decisions, whether it's for planning or it's for operations on a day-to-day basis, public works, major events, emergencies, all of those operations are done through this operations center, because those require a tremendous amount of coordination across the departments. The trigger for this really was a very tragic flooding incident that happened in 2010 in April, where the city of Rio lost more than 100 people, 100 lives, a lot of property, because of mudslides in the favelas. And the mayor decided, pretty much on a sort of an executive type of a mode, that this needs to happen very quickly. And I'll tell you more about the journey of that. But I would like you to hear from the City Hall. I'm going to show you a video now. This was made by the City Hall of Rio, not by IBM. I would like you to see how the city of Rio looks at this operation center and how they use it to take the management of the city to the next level. So let's roll the video, please. This journey of transformation actually happened very quickly in Rio de Janeiro. That was one of the most amazing things, because, of course, of the emergency they had in 2010, but also because they're preparing in a very short time frame for the World Cup in the Football World Cup, Soccer World Cup in 2014, and the Olympics in 2016. So when we met the city in May of 2010, the mayor was already considering how to manage emergencies better, but eventually, very, very quickly actually, it turned into an overall operations management system for the entire city of 30 departments. And in August, we began the project, and in December, we had the very first version of this operations center functional, with the International Olympic Committee president participating in the opening, because this was the first step towards the preparations. But more importantly, last year in November 2011, we did a full simulation of one of the worst possible emergency or crisis incidents in the city, which involved more than 100 people, starting from the mayor, all of the secretaries that are involved, the executives like the chief operations officer and the chief information officer, as well as the field personnel, the supervisors, coordinators, and everybody, to do one of the best large-scale simulations that I have seen across all of the cities in the world. And so I believe that this is a transformation in governance. It's not just about technology, because the technology is only supporting the processes and the protocols that they put into place, but it's a transformation in the governance of the city of Rio de Janeiro. And that has made the biggest difference for them going forward. Economic development has been one of the results that has come out of this. So what I want to end with is to suggest that whether you're thinking about one of the subsystems in a city, like transportation, healthcare, public safety, or buildings, or whether you're thinking about a whole city transformation, which obviously is the ultimate goal, information technology can play a significant role. This is the modern world. And it's not just IBM that is saying this. Almost every company that's working in this area now will tell you that. And just in IBM, we have a number of what we call solutions for each of those subsystems. It can be at the departmental level, or it can be at the level of the mayor or the city manager, who looks across all of the departments and coordinates all of these. And that's what you see in the center of this picture, which talks about an operations center. But this happens because of another theme in this conference, which is that the ecosystem of a city has to come together. It's not just going to be one company or one industry even. It has to be a coordinated effort between the architects, the engineering companies, the operations companies, multiple industries such as the telecommunications industry, for example, the construction industry, and that's the private sector. Then in the public sector, there's got to be the right level of leadership and vision to bring together this ecosystem. And there's a lot of innovation that has to happen as well, through startups, through the engagement of citizens, through, for innovation. There's a lot of examples where citizens have participated in large-scale brainstorming innovation sessions that has resulted in the biggest transformations. So citizen engagement through the press and directly through to citizens through information technology and telecommunications, that kind of an ecosystem coming together is going to create the biggest transformations in cities going forward. So thank you very much for this opportunity to speak again. And I think we may have a minute or two for a question if anybody has some. Okay, well, this has turned out, it's actually published information. This is not, it's not hidden in any means at all. This is a publicly procured system through open bidding, and it was a public-private partnership. So the mayor actually got several companies to also contribute, through various mechanisms, and the city hall has directly invested $14 million US. But that's not the full price of this, because there's a lot of other entities that has co-invested in this operational center. Any other questions? Yes? Excellent question. Excellent question. Thank you very much for raising that. I had the opportunity to speak to Mark last night about some of the smaller cities and communities around Canada. And I have similar conversations with multiple countries. There's one conversation I'm having in the state of Utah in the United States. I'm having another conversation in the city of Sao Paulo in Brazil, as well as experience coming from the United Kingdom in the Sunderland County. And the important point is that this advancement using digital infrastructure is not limited just to big cities. And the reason is because there are a lot of gains that can be obtained through shared infrastructure. So if you're a small city, if there is an opportunity to come together with other small communities around your town, and if you're able to remove the redundancies in all of the operations and the infrastructure that you've put in place in each of the individual communities, and if you can share that infrastructure, that can result in like a regional, smarter operations and smarter planning kind of a facility. And that can be supported through technologies like cloud, which can give you the ability to pay as you go. So as a small community, you can subscribe to a service that you believe you need for your community, and pay for only those services that you actually use, as opposed to having to invest capital expenditure in a very large center like the one that you saw in Rio de Janeiro. So it's a very important thing that cities and towns, even smaller communities, all the way down to few tens of thousands of people. One of the great examples we have of a small community that has done something like this is the city of Dubuque in Iowa. It's a 60,000 person community that has transformed itself for sustainability in the long run. I was just speaking to the mayor of Dubuque last week in Singapore, and he was discussing, what it means to create better services for a small community, sustainable, long-term views of what it means to develop the city. And Dubuque, by the way, has been named the most livable city in the United States, a livable small city in the United States this year. So thank you for the question. I think I'm going to have to end here. We'll move on to the next topic. Thank you very much for this opportunity again.